Have you ever been frustrated with the lack of variety for sports assets in Cities Skylines 2? Well, I'm going to show you how to build your own. In today's build, we're going to go big. I'll show you how to create a sprawling sports complex. It'll have a ton of variety: baseball, softball, football, lacrosse, basketball, indoor sports, you name it. And have you ever heard of pickleball? No, that's a new one for me too, but it's a thing and it's in the build too. We'll get all the support and service buildings in place, and there will be a ton of detailing today. We'll make the most of the tools made available by the community of talented modders, and we'll create something really spectacular. Are you ready to get started? Okay, let's go. So after flattening a parcel of land, the first thing I wanted to do was to get the full size baseball and softball pitch outlines done. So I drew out a cross with the roads, and we're going to be using them as guidelines essentially. Using the normal road here meant that I could use the grid snapping as guidelines for my paths, and these paths will also be used as guideline for the surfaces and the net lanes that we're going to be using later on in the build. Once the paths are in, I created a bit of a quarter circle in each of the quadrants. There are a few elements at the beginning of the build here that I changed course on. The first was an additional field to the north. Once I get into the build a bit, it was pretty clear that the scope of the build was getting sort of expansive. So this field at the lower elevation just to the north will be abandoned, and I'm going to be focusing the efforts elsewhere. I was taking inspiration from a number of big sports parks in Florida, or sports complexes, rather than just a single one. So I tried to incorporate design elements from multiple sources here, and they don't always blend together as nicely as you would want. So you will see me adjust some of the angles here and there, and here on the outer field as well a little bit later on. In the end, I changed my mind here and decided to go for something a little bit different, and I'll be reverting those angles back to what they were originally a bit later in the build. For the first car park entrance, I know I want a small one-way system, so I'm going to create a single node that I want the car park roads to terminate in. So we use a roundabout trick to do that. You can create a little frame so you know you're bringing it in straight on a 90-degree angle. Ending up with a node here, a single node that looks a little funky. It can be fixed with Move It. We just pop on the manipulation mode, and we can have a mess about with stretching the nodes, and we can get it looking pretty good, pretty easily. With the entrance in place, I'm going to draw out some access roads from the one-way entrance. I'll add some basic parking spaces between, and we'll try and get the sizes and road markings lined up best we can. I'll complete that one way with a basic roundabout at the end. And I'm not going to spend too much time going through car park stuff, we've covered it plenty of times before. After this was recorded, the detailers patch had come out, and in fact one of the new car parks would have been a perfect fit for this little area. It could have saved me quite a bit of time. I was a few days early for that, but oh well, what can you do? But it should make things a little bit quicker in the future if I'm building something similar. I've encircled the fields. This, if it stays in place, will act as a bit of a barrier for development. It'll basically keep me in check and prevent me from building out, but it'll also act as a guideline and possibly access for the Sims as the development expands. So we'll need to see. On to the football pitches now, or soccer fields if you're that way inclined. Ridiculously easy to get these in. You just grab the detail from Find It, line them up next to each other, and you're set. I am going to convert a couple of these to a multi-use pitch. They're going to be able to host football and lacrosse. It was pretty fiddly getting the lacrosse stuff done, but it does look really good. But I'll show you how to get that in later. The rest of the pitches here, I took advantage of Control C mod, and I just copied and pasted them in. Lovely. After getting them in and getting a better feel for the magnitude of the overall development, I reckon a bit more parking was required to better match up with the size of the facility. I definitely want tennis courts in here, and I want the grass ones like I have over at the GMAX Country Club. So I was curious to see if I could copy it over. Okay, that little section worked. Let's see if we can copy the whole thing in. Okay, maybe not. Wow, that would have been something if it worked though. Would have been a real time saver. In the end, I just selected one of the courts and I was able to line it up pretty easily and get all the main elements in their place. Deleting all the stuff we don't need here is easy enough, and one nice little trick I learned on the live stream the other day was that you can use the tool mode and delete one specific prop using the brush. Now I know that worked for trees and vegetation, but if you pick the prop using the picker, it works just the same for props. Can't remember who told me that on stream now, but thank you for whoever it was. Super useful to know. Now I want to get this shifted over a bit using Move It, and there will be some bits and pieces that need to be deleted, and of course I'll need to get the surfaces redone as well, but it's not too big a job. Now I tried the same trick with the basketball courts from the police jail facility. Sadly, it didn't work. I'm guessing you can't copy net lanes, which is essentially how the basketball markings were created. So no problem, I think I might just use the in-game ones. With the tennis courts in place, I wanted to crack on with the path network and the central area, and in particular I want to smooth curved connections where possible. I'd like to be keeping it angular around the facilities themselves, but I'd like some flowing curves for the intersections, and that will kind of form something of a path network, or park network I should say rather, a little bit later on. Well, that's the plan. I'm going to introduce the standard basketball courts, and I think the bright colours are pretty much going to be in keeping for what we've got planned here later on with the bigger sports area. So yeah, not going to go custom on that one, we'll use the in-game ones, and I think that'll be a good fit. The middle area will form a larger park. It will have a few features, but it won't be too busy looking. I kind of want an expansive, open, central recreation area, and I'll very much be building around it rather than on it. So I took a rough outline from one of those big Florida sports complex I was talking about in terms of putting this kind of park together, but I'll be making it my own very much, and we'll have something hopefully sort of beautiful and unique by the time we're done. Dividing it up into little sections like this gives us little mini areas for distinctive detailing. We're able to fence things off and we get nice and creative. So let's get the rest of the path work done, and we'll box off the football pitches while we're at it. Next up, I want to introduce an indoor activities centre, and for this I'm going to run a little alley road, and I'm going to use one of the big warehouse assets for this as well. This particular one, it's got something of an adjoining office built into it, and I'd like that to be the main entrance. And I want the entrance onto this park side, so I'll need to just make sure that the orientation is correct. And with the props removed, this will afford us something of a blank canvas that we can detail. We can transform it into something else entirely. For the indoor centre, kind of need to use a little bit of imagination, and I imagine this kind of facility would have like crazy golf or trampolines, maybe indoor climbing, you know, that kind of good stuff that would tire out the kids, right? I like this, I think it's a cool addition, and we can do lots with it later down the line. After fixing up a bit of the path network, it really does show how massive this is getting, and we're only just started. I'm going to get cracking with the lacrosse fields I mentioned earlier. Essentially, I'm going to use the yellow line net lanes that you can find in the extra detailing mod. Getting these in place isn't complicated, just takes a bit of time and a bit of patience. If you're going to give this a crack yourself, use the snapping options as and when you need them. The right angle, existing snapping, and the guidelined one can be toggled on and off as and when you need them. If you are going to do it yourself, just get a picture up on another monitor or your phone or your tablet or whatever, and you can build away. Having the football field markings in there already is a huge help, and it'll help you keep everything in proportion as well. Once the first one is finished and in place, the second one goes a lot quicker, as you can use the guidelines to snap onto from a lot of the initial markings that you've got on the first field. Nearly complete here, and I think that's well worth the time to do. What do you guys reckon? I'm going to add a few more courts, and this time it's pickleball. I'll admit, yeah, pickleball, it's a new one for me. It seems to be something of a hybrid between badminton, table tennis and normal tennis. I'm not gonna lie, it sounds like it might be fun. So here I'm gonna create a good number of courts side by side. I'll use the same net tool lane and extra detailing that we did for the lacrosse fields, but this time it's just gonna be the white one, the white line. These courts are pretty much based on badminton courts, so they're pretty straightforward to make. I am trying to keep everything to scale with these courts the best I can. Again, if you're giving it a crack yourself, quick Google search will keep you right in terms of any of the dimensions for any of the courts. I definitely recommend looking that up if you're going to do your own. I'm going to do a similar job and make some larger courts, 3 this time, and these are going to be our volleyball courts. So let's get these things all wrapped up now. Okay, they're looking good. I think we can move on. Over near the indoor centre, I decided to create a couple of little league fields. They'll be a nice addition, and it's definitely something that you would expect to see in a sports complex of this size. Here, I want to get the border of the development defined and get an idea of really how all the different elements are going to fit in and how they're going to look and fit in with the wider surrounding area. So I'm going to get rid of the northern marker road that I used to mark the drop in the elevation right at the very beginning, and in its place I'll create a gentle slope up from the connector road. Then I can take the opportunity to extend the arterial network north along the side of the football pitches, and I can box the whole complex off by completing and connecting the connector to the arterial. After smoothing out the land surrounding the quad fields, I did the same over where I was planning on doing the standalone field. I've got more than enough to keep me going within the main development area here, so it's really not necessary to be adding any more stuff outside it at this point. So with the terraforming out of the way, I was going to swing back to the activity centre and get the outline of the parking done on that side too. The entrance will be similar to what we have on the other side, so a little one-way system again, several short car parks surrounding the building. On the 2 available sides is the way I'm going to go here, and I'm going to get a bit of surface work done as well, and it's always nice getting onto the surfaces for these types of builds. The extra colour really does bring it alive, I reckon, and I'm going to stretch out the surface in the car parks and make little walkways for easy access to that big building. Now, once the basics of the car park is done and out of the way, I'm going to swing over to the other side and back over to car park number 1. So it will be a similar idea over on this side, direct access to the roads and paths, and once we go into the detailing, I'm going to be using similar materials and vegetation to detail it, but we'll design each side a little bit different so it's not too samey, and it should give us a pretty nice effect. Next up for some surface work is the volleyball courts. I'm going to use the sand colour in the main court, even though this would likely be an artificial surface here. Kind of makes sense to use that colour nonetheless. Surrounding the court, I want that artificial looking bright green again. I can see that as being an AstroTurf type surface. That'd be perfect for all the pitches and the fields that we'll be coming up to shortly as well. For the pickleball, I'm going to use the same grass, but I wanted a blue outer court. Not many choices to choose from really, so I'm going to use the water surface mod here because it's closest blue that I can get. Might come back, it does look a little bit dark, but it will do for now. The positioning of those lines need a bit of a rejig, so move it to the rescue once more. Let's get that sorted. All the football and mixed use fields need that AstroTurf treatment now as well, so they're next up. Nice and easy. Yep, happy days. Yeah, they do look good once they're in, don't they? Yep, lovely. The tennis courts, I know that I want the tennis courts to look exactly the same as the country club. It's a good contrast between the two grass surfaces and it looks particularly good at night. So I want exactly the same effect here. So I'm going to use those two surfaces, get them in place like now. Tennis courts, as you would have seen, have a second grass surface as the surrounding base, essentially. So for the pickleball and the volleyball, I wanted a concrete base. So I've gone ahead and I'm going to put them in for now. For the baseball fields, I reverted back to the original design. So I went about getting those quarter circles back to 90-degree angles all the way out. I thought I'm just complicating this unnecessarily really, so back to the original and keep it simple. I'm not too worried if the circles don't quite match up or if the length of the paths is maybe too short or too long. I will attempt to get them as close as possible and as early on in the build as possible too, but at the end of the day, what's move it for, you know? We'll just use the mods and we'll readjust it. I reckon we've got a fairly decent effort here, and the concentric circles there on the outside, well, at least it's good enough for me to run with for now. For the surfaces here on the baseball and the softball fields, I'm going to use the paths with right angles and curves to get the geometry just right that's required, and I'm just going to be surfacing around that, so it's going to act as a template. There will be a few adjustments as we go along, as expected. One small but important detail is getting the white boundary lines in place around each of the fields. Same tool as we were using for the other stuff earlier on, but here I'm going to follow around the path, and once these are all in place, we can finally delete the paths that we've been using for our guidelines and our templates. They will not stay in the build. Once the lighter sand surfaces are done, and that did take a while, these facilities will need to be fenced off, so I'm going to go ahead and we'll get that done too, and we'll be getting the little league ones done at the same time. Now honestly, there's not much more for me to explain here as I go along and build this up, but it's quite satisfying watching it to come together, so I'm going to pop it on a little bit of a time lapse. It won't be too long. I'll stick on a little tune and I'll catch up with you in a few minutes. Now that the backing sports are sorted in terms of fencing, the other facilities will need the same treatment. I'm going to use the same fence net lane here, which is the high industrial, and for the football pitches we need something to prevent the balls going off onto the roads and the other play areas, so obviously we'll need some fencing here as well. Some paving between the individual pitches I reckon will be necessary. And here I'm going to get the artificial grass in place, and super simple, we just trace around the networks and the surfaces we've put in place already. Simple stuff. For the pitcher's mound, I'll need to be careful not to override that sand surface, so I'm going to surface around it. These surfaces, sometimes they'll go over, sometimes they'll go under, just depends on the individual one, so need to be careful not to overlap it just yet. So as I said, we'll go around it and then we can just drag over the corners, and it looks decent. It looks like a smooth connection. Now I'll go ahead and I'll get all 3 baseball and all 3 softball ones sorted out now. I'm going to take a minute here and take stock of where we are. So obviously it's been a lot of work already to take us up to this point. Those baseball field surfaces were really time consuming. I'm kind of glad that they're done now. I'm really happy with how they look. Even before we start detailing and having a look at the overview, you can review the scale of the parks, the car parks, the big warehouse or indoor activity centre that we'll be converting, and the initial paving outlines along with the other bits and pieces we've added, and it's looking pretty good to scale, and I'm happy with that. I don't think we need any major adjustments at this point, so let's crack on. Now, any big sports complex like this will need lighting, and it will need lots of it. For the football and the baseball, I'm going to use the big floodlights. Now sadly they don't have the reach to illuminate the middle of the fields. However, what you can do to brighten it up to the max is place several lights in the same spot. You need to pop anarchy on, but if you click it 3 or 4 or 5 times, it will brighten up significantly. So I'm just going to rinse and repeat until all the big grass areas are well illuminated. The smaller areas like the volleyball, pickleball, car parks, they won't need that extra illumination. They're quite small areas as they are, so I'll get something a little bit more appropriate in for those areas. Single lights should do the trick, and of course for the car park, a more appropriate lighting asset should be used here. And that's looking pretty cool at night, huh? A really important aspect of this design is going to be the custom paving that will connect all the fields together. It will of course give us an obvious link to bind each element together, but it also makes that part of the development stand out from the other assets and form a really nice point of interest from an aesthetic point of view. It just looks pretty, but it ain't there just to look nice. It's going to give us some nice detailing opportunities. The props we use a little bit later on should hopefully make it shine and yeah, make a nice spot to look at. You may notice that there's an awful lot of park lights in the park just now. I got a little bit carried away and I kind of lost track of how close I was putting the things together. I'm going to wipe them all out. I'm going to replace them by hand later on, so yeah, just ignore that for now. Plopped a couple of props down at the footy pitches and on the entrance, and I created a little reflective lake using Elgendo's excellent surfaces. I am going to come back later though. I'm going to change that surface to something else that I think is a little bit more suitable, so do keep an eye out for that. We're going to use a couple of different things later. Now I do want to add some more functional buildings into this development. Our office demand is strong, so I'm going to run with that and have a little look and just see what grows in. After adding a bit more pathwork, I'm going to flip over to the other side and I'm going to add a storage area. You know, something that can act as a maintenance or a service area. You would absolutely expect to see one here. I think some trash bin props will do well, and I'm going to add a little bit more of dedicated parking as well. The detailers patch dropped in the middle of this build, so one of the new car parks here, the shaded one, will be a perfect addition. And how good are all the new assets, by the way? So good, so good. We'll get stuck into them properly in some upcoming episodes, but we will get an opportunity to add a couple of them today as well, and that car park's the first one. Before we crack on with the detailing, I think it's time to get the bulk of the vegetation in place around the border, so let's crack on with that. Okay, what's your thoughts so far, guys? That big building isn't looking like much of an indoor activity centre yet, does it? So let's remedy that. We'll get rid of all the extra props that surround the building first. They have a little habit of coming back, so you might see me delete these again a little bit later on in the build. What I want to do now is to disguise the numbered warehouse doors on the side of the building. Instead, I'm going to convert it to an outdoor food court. Each number here will represent the plot in which the traders can set up their pitch. I'd like a number of those doors hidden, so I'm going to create a raised area to place the food kiosks on. Grabbing the pillars and moving them into place is easy enough to get a bit of a stepped effect leading up to the side of the building. Although I'm not quite ready to purely do all the detailing right now, I did want to get a chunk of this area done, and really just to see if it worked on the side and just to see if it looked okay, because if it didn't, I'd need to come up with something else, obviously. I wanted to add a bit of branding, so I just chose a company at random and fired up a few signs about the place. It's much the same idea at the front and the back of the building. Again, I just want to get a little bit of detailing done, really just to see if it's suitable, for expansion later on. I've got some ideas how to make this a proper entrance later on, and run it back to a certain degree, and it's just going to be some basic detailing, and we'll create a bit of a service area around the back and a bit of a consumer area at the front. The first car park, I'm going to use the small solid wall knit lane to box things in. Nothing too fancy here. I will keep that design consistent on this side, which should look pretty good. With the walls in place and a lot of the gaps looking consistent as well, I'm going to create a little pattern of bushes and trees, and I'm going to just copy them and paste them into position. And it's a wonderful little time saver that. There will be a few wayward bushes here and there, but it's easily tidied up. We just delete the ones sticking out the walls, and we'll just fill the gaps by just plopping the bushes in by hand. I'll get the rest of the walled areas filled up here, and then we can move on. Now I noticed here that I've ended up using a smaller version of the trees than I wanted to, so that's my mistake, so let's get that fixed. It's no problem, let's just use the replace tool, make sure the height is the one that I want, and that's selected, and we'll just go with that, and we're good to go. Easy, lovely. Time to add a bit of character to our little league fields, and I'd like to add some seating over here so the excited parents can scream at the kids, and we'll make it nice for them by surrounding it with a bit of path, and we'll give some nice brick surfaces underneath. And yeah, that's a nice fit. Over at the courts, you can see we're getting a decent bit of pedestrian action now, which is good to see. I'd like to expand on that and add a bit more functional development down here. So I'm going to plop a building down first, just to see how it fits within the fenced area. We'll see if it works, by the volleyball courts, and adding a few props. And I think, yeah, that looks okay, doesn't it? Now let's expand this now, and we'll get it functional. I'm going to use the big pedestrian road. I'm not usually a massive fan of this road. I'd love to get one that isn't quite so wide, but I think I can make it work down here. It is a good asset to use, but I think you have to use it sparingly, and you have to use it when it's appropriate. I'll need to fix up the paths a bit, but it should be okay. We can now expand this pedestrian road a bit, and it'll fill a gap really nicely here. We'll keep it nice and compact. Over at the food court, I'm gonna plot a building down here too, and we'll see if that works. It is a commercial one, we'll have it overlapping obviously the main building a bit. I don't have any demand for commercial right now, and I can see there's a broken pedestrian route there at the back as well. Not sure if I can fix that with the invisible paths or not, but I can tell you the building did become occupied later on, which was nice to see. Around the front of the building, I want to create the entrance now for that facility. I used the shop front here, which worked kind of nice. And that's a bit more of a consumer entrance you might expect to see, isn't it? To fill that door-sized gap, I used one of Crypto Gamer Skyline's new industrial door decals, and that worked really nice as a shutter for the two sections at the left-hand side of that storefront. Ideal. Around the side, I'll finish the detailing. I'm going to add some boxes I'm going to use as planters. I think this works nicely and it gives a little bit of a rougher feel, or maybe a more industrial feel, you know, to the outside. Than perhaps maybe using some of the more refined tree planter decals. They do have a place in this build, but we'll be coming back to that a bit later on. I just think this is a better fit, you know, for this area. At this point, I'm going to crack on with some detailing and a little bit of a tidy up around the office side of the project and the little maintenance area we did earlier. I'll need to get some surfaces sorted out. I'm going to need a bit of fencing put in place. Some of the courts require some prop work, and once they're in place and they have a bit of vegetation added, the football fields will need finished off, and there's not too much to do there. It's just a bit of path work and a bit of surfacing around the sports stand. The entrances will need some work for sure, so we'll visit them in a minute or two as well, but it's all going to be pretty self-explanatory at this point again, so again, I'm going to pop on a little time lapse and I'll catch up with you in a few minutes. One interesting asset that was added in the detailers patch was the small clinic. Interestingly, when I was researching these big sports complexes, often they included some public service buildings. I found fire stations and even a town hall, within the confines of these parks. So what I decided to do, as the city is struggling a little bit with the healthcare, I wanted to add one of these clinics, and it was actually a perfect fit and do the job really nicely. You just need to kind of resurface and drag out the fences a bit. And that's looking really good. The areas where we have the buildings are looking a bit more the part now, and we've got these areas filled out pretty much as I want them to. So I think we're good to go. Within the park, I'd like to add some distinct sub-areas or sub-park areas. So here, I'm going to add a little custom adventure playground, and I'm also going to add a little custom dog park as well. For the kids park, I'm going to plop down the play assets first, and I'm going to add a little texture to give the impression that they've been built on a sort of wood bark area. So you'll see that stuff put down for safety in case kids fall or whatever. And didn't have that in my day. The swings and the roundabouts were all built on concrete. If you fell and split your head open, so be it. For the play huts, I've given them some wood surfaces, so they have their own little platform as such. With it fenced off and some entrance props added, I'll give a nice little effect. And also, nearly forgot, I'm going to be adding some patches of the golden sand surface as well. Adding a few of these around the place just adds a bit of wear and tear, and it gives the impression that the place is a little bit more used, a little bit more in use. A few trees and bushes around the border will complete the work here for this one. Now on to the other corner of the park, and this is where you will find the dog park. I'll repeat the process over here to a certain degree. So the assets went down first, and I used the same surface trick down here with the golden sand surface, but I want it a little bit more open, so I'm not going to be adding any additional vegetation down here. One thing I will change, however, is the fencing. I used the larger wooden fencing down here, and of course this will give us a more secure area. And talking about secure areas, I'm going to add a big fence, a big gate rather, to the park as well. We'll keep the doggos in. A couple of nice additions, I reckon. After sorting out the last of the fencing on the volleyball courts, I reckon we'll be needing some amended illumination now for the park. I did mention earlier that I was going to replace those park lights and stick them in by hand. Really, it just needs to be a bit better spaced out. So here's what it looks like at night with those park lights replaced. I've added them all around the main park area, as well as the outer ring of the big baseball area. At the big park, I've gone ahead and added some manicured grass surfaces around the main area, and I'm going to be leaving some wedge shaped areas on the outside. We'll leave that with the default texture, default grass. For the little circular areas, I'm planning on having little ponds, and I plan on adding some vegetation to these areas in a minute. So I want to fence it off using the net lane, and I've just used Move It to fine tune the placement on these little white fences. It's so handy getting the curves done like this. It means that you don't have to be too exacting in its initial placement. It's such a time saver just using Move It and nudging it into place. For the main water area in the middle, I'm going to use one of the new surfaces. I'll show you the difference between the water surfaces here. Originally, I was going to use the blue still water. This gives us the most reflective effect. It looks stunning, but I decided to swap it out for one of Elgando's latest surfaces instead. And this particular one has a little ripple effect, which works really well, but it also has the added benefit in that when you zoom out of the area and you look at the area above, The water surfaces are much more closely matched with the in-game watercolour. So really nice addition there. Ugendo's got 3 surface packs available on PDX mods now. I'll leave you the links for those in the description below, so if you want to check them out, feel free to download them. For the little circular ponds, I want a huge tree in the middle, and we're going to give the impression that there might be a little island in there perhaps. Then we're going to surround it with bushes just inside the fenced border. The surface I'm going to use here is the green one. I guess the little ponds, you know, they're full of vegetation and they might have a little bit of algae growing in them or something like that. So I think it's a good effect. It is reflective, but it will not catch the sun too much, as we've got plenty of overgrowth here, and that should block any of the reflections and it shouldn't catch your eye. There's a few bits and pieces I want tidied up after adding some of the park benches. The Sims were using the path at the pickleball to cut through, so I'm going to put an end to that and they can walk around it instead. Yeah, that's better. We finished the car park on the other side already, and I think I mentioned earlier that I'll be looking to do something similar but different on the other side. I'm going to use the same matching surfaces and walls around the main build. I'll also match the white fencing at the entrance that surrounds the brown gravel or dirt effect area. The choice of vegetation will be identical too, so it's the same trees at the entrance, and we're going to use the same combination of bushes and trees around the main car park area as well. At the turnaround, instead of a roundabout at that entrance, I've created a little marked off drop-off space using the pink net lane, which was perfect. And after adding a bit of signage, a few slow down decals, we're left with this. This is all coming together really beautifully now. I can go and finish off the detail at the big baseball fields. It is a spectator sport, so we'll need to add some seating here. It's pretty tight for space, so I'll need to be careful on the placements for these big props. I'm going to add a stand on each of the 4 main concourses. I think any more than that and it's just going to look a bit busy and a bit cramped. In addition to that, I'll add a couple of bigger stands in the middle open area, and this is going to serve what I reckon will be the 2 main fields. However, this building will also serve other purposes, and with a couple more props, I'm going to give it a little bit more life. I went ahead and filled the gaps between the stands on both sides, and we've added a bit of signage for a bit of colour as well. Then what I did was grab the pergola door and attached it to the side of the buildings, and we created little entrances on each side. Now I can imagine that can be a little changing room or maybe an administration facility in the heart of the development. Nice. I changed out all the player seating to the larger covered seats, and keeping the colour the same, I want to try and match it up with the stands and the props. At the edge of the 4 concourse areas, the paved areas, just as the space widens, I've gone and added some shaded areas using the pergolas and the line tool. This adds something of a small event or maybe a gathering area, and I guess if you squint your eyes you could maybe imagine that they're batting cages for practice. Okay, maybe that's a stretch, but the props here break up the big open space nicely, and again I don't want anything looking too overcrowded. Some kiosks are appropriate here as well. Now these could be food facilities, or they could be a ticket office, or maybe equipment rental. Loads of reasons to have these things in here. If you remember, I based this on several of Florida's big sports complexes, so what I want to do now is to add some Florida palms. Not too many, I'm going to space them out nicely, and I went and gave each one of the flat planter decals to look the part as well, and it does make quite a difference just adding them down. Some trash bins and scoreboards add a little bit more prop interest in this part of the build, and I wanted to add a couple of little sheltered areas just at the back of the fields as well. Now, I don't want to sound too immodest, but I reckon that looks stunning. I'm so happy with this. I'm so happy with it. I've added a few little details to wrap things up, and using the terraforming tool, I added a little mound on each of the baseball fields. It's a nice little addition. The 70 decals were removed from the entrances. They obviously weren't appropriate. It is highway I'm using, but yeah, let's get that out. It's just silly. I've also created some football training layouts using cones, poles, and some of the other sports props. So we've got an agility layout, we've got another one for dribbling practice, a free kick setup area, and we've got some hurdles to improve the balance and coordination of the players. Over in the park, I took a minute or two and created a little picnic area beside the lake. There was a very last minute addition to the final detailing, and we've managed to squeeze in a brand new mod, and that's Yin Yang's Recolor. You can use this mod to change the colour palette of props and buildings. I've not had the chance to play with it much, but I'm going to use it here. I'm going to change all the seating to red, and I think that's going to make it pop out a bit more. And what incredible addition to the game. This is going to be absolutely exceptional work. I'm going to do exactly the same over here on the Little League fields. Let's get them all over to red. And you can just simply copy and paste this once we've got the colour we want. You just click the prop and paste it in the app. Super simple. Lovely stuff. So that was a lot of work on this episode. Certainly more than I would usually cover in a single video. Kind of told myself not to give myself so much work after the big beach hotel build, but here we are. I hope you all enjoyed watching me putting it together, and I'm definitely happy with the finished outcome. Thank you so much for choosing to watch the video, and thank you for making it to the end. A particular big thank you to my Patreon and my YouTube members. Your support is always appreciated, but if you want to support the channel for free, a like, a comment on the video really helps, doesn't cost you a penny, and feel free to share the video with anyone you think might like it. I'm going to leave you with a few shots of the finished development to enjoy now, and I hope you all have a lovely day, and I'll catch you in the next one.